she let a single dad and his daughter stay for one night, unaware. He was the new CEO of her company. Sometimes a single act of kindness can change everything. Tonight I'm sharing a story about Amelia Grant, who opened her door to strangers on the coldest night of the year, never knowing that this one decision would transform her entire world. But here's the twist that will leave you speechless. The homeless father she helped wasn't who he appeared to be. Stay with me until the end to discover how one night of compassion led to the most unexpected love story, and please comment with your city so I can see how far this incredible tale has traveled across the world. The fluorescent lights of Morrison and Associates flickered overhead like dying stars as Amelia Grant cleared out her desk for the final time. Each item she placed into the cardboard box felt heavier than the last, the coffee-stained company mug that had seen her through countless late nights, the small succulent her mother had given her on her first day, now brown and wilted from neglect, and the framed photo of her and her mother from last Christmas, when everything still seemed possible. "I'm sorry, Amelia, but we have to make cuts somewhere," Mr. Henderson had said just an hour earlier, his voice carrying all the warmth of a winter grave. "Your performance reviews have been inconsistent lately. We need people who can give 100%. 100%. The words echoed in her mind as she folded the termination letter and slipped it between the pages of her daily planner. How could she explain that her inconsistent performance was the result of sleepless nights spent at her mother's bedside watching cancer slowly steal away the woman who had raised her single-handedly? How could she tell them that every tardy mark on her record represented another emergency room visit, another round of chemotherapy that left her mother too weak to be alone? She couldn't. So she had simply nodded, signed the papers, and began the humiliating ritual of packing her professional life into a box that barely held 3 years of memories. The December wind cut through downtown Seattle like a blade as Amelia emerged from the building that had been her second home. Snow fell in thick, wet flakes that melted the moment they touched the pavement, creating a slush that seeped through the hole in her left boot. The one she'd been meaning to replace for months, but couldn't afford to. Her breath formed small clouds in the frigid air as she hugged the cardboard box closer to her chest. The weight of it nothing compared to the crushing reality of her situation. Unemployed. Again. This was the third job she'd lost in 2 years, each termination, following the same pattern, exemplary work, until her mother's condition worsened. Then a slow decline as exhaustion and worry consumed her focus. She'd tried to balance it all: the demanding career, the medical appointments, the insurance battles, the midnight phone calls from her mother, who forgot where she was or couldn't remember how to work the television remote. But something always had to give, and it was never her mother. The walk to her studio apartment normally took 15 minutes, but tonight the wind made every step a struggle. Her thin jacket, purchased during better times when she thought she'd never again know real financial hardship, offered little protection against the storm that seemed determined to freeze Seattle solid. By the time she reached Pine Street, her fingers were numb despite her gloves, and her toes had lost all sensation. She was fumbling with her keys outside the entrance to her building when she heard a soft whimpering that cut through the howling wind like a cry for help. At first, she thought it might be a stray cat, but as she turned toward the sound, her heart clenched at what she saw. Huddled beneath the narrow awning of Rosie's Cafe, which had closed hours ago, sat a man and a little girl. The man appeared to be in his 30s, with dark hair that curled slightly at the edges, and clothes that had once been expensive but now bore the unmistakable signs of hard times, wrinkled slightly too large and inadequate for the brutal cold. But it was the child who broke Amelia's heart completely. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old, with long blonde hair that escaped from beneath a knit cap that was clearly too big for her small head. She wore a pink coat that might have been warm enough for fall, but was woefully insufficient for this December storm. Her small hands were pressed together and held close to her mouth as she tried to warm them with her breath, and even from across the street, Amelia could see that she was shivering violently. "Daddy, I'm really cold," the little girl whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. The man pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her small frame in what appeared to be a desperate attempt to share what little warmth he had. "I know, sweetheart. I know. Just hold on a little longer, okay? We'll figure something out." But Amelia could see the defeat in his posture, the way his shoulders sagged with the weight of promises he couldn't keep. She could see the fear in his eyes as he looked down at his daughter, knowing that the temperature was dropping and the shelters were already full, and that he was running out of options to keep his child safe. For a moment, Amelia hesitated. She thought about her own precarious situation, the rent that was due next week, the dwindling bank account, the uncertainty of when she'd find another job. She thought about the risks of inviting strangers into her home, about all the warnings she'd heard about trusting people she didn't know. She thought about the fact that her apartment was barely big enough for one person, let alone 3. But then the little girl coughed a harsh rattling sound that spoke of exhaustion and exposure, and all of Amelia's practical concerns evaporated like steam. She was crossing the street before she'd fully made the decision, her feet carrying her toward the huddled pair as if pulled by some invisible force. The man looked up as she approached, and she could see the wariness in his dark eyes, the instinctive protective stance he took as he shifted slightly in front of his daughter. "Excuse me," Amelia said, her voice gentler than she'd expected it to be. "I'm sorry to bother you, but are you okay? Do you have somewhere to go tonight?" The man's jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought he might tell her to mind her own business. Pride flickered across his features, the kind of pride that came from falling further than you ever thought possible, and still trying to maintain some semblance of dignity. "We're fine," he said quietly, but the words lacked conviction. "Thank you for asking, but we don't need Daddy." The little girl interrupted, her voice small and scared. "I can't feel my toes." The man's facade crumbled instantly. Amelia watched as his protective exterior gave way to raw desperation, the kind that only a parent facing their child's suffering could understand. His hands shook, whether from cold or emotion she couldn't tell, as he looked from his daughter to Amelia and back again. "Look," Amelia said, making a decision that felt both terrifying and absolutely right. "I live right across the street. It's not much, but it's warm and dry. You're both welcome to stay tonight. No strings attached, no expectations. Just somewhere safe to sleep." The man stared at her for a long moment, and Amelia could see him weighing his options, the danger of trusting a stranger against the danger of spending another hour in the freezing cold with his sick child. Finally, his shoulders sagged in defeat and gratitude. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "We don't want to impose, and I have to be honest, I can't pay you anything right now." "I'm not asking for payment," Amelia replied firmly. "I'm just offering a warm place to sleep, that's all." The little girl looked up at her father with hope shining in her tired eyes. "Can we, Daddy, please?" The man closed his eyes for a moment, as if gathering strength, then nodded slowly. "Okay," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you. You have no idea what this means." But Amelia thought she might have some idea. She remembered what it felt like to be desperate, to feel like the world was closing in from all sides, with no way out. She remembered the kindness of strangers who had helped her mother during the worst days of her illness. The nurse who had stayed past her shift. The social worker who had fought the insurance company on their behalf. The elderly woman in the oncology waiting room who had simply held Amelia's hand while she cried. Sometimes kindness was the only thing standing between despair and hope. "I'm Amelia," she said, extending her hand. "Daniel," the man replied, his handshake firm despite his circumstances. "And this is Clara." Clara peeked out from behind her father's arm and offered Amelia a shy smile that was like sunshine breaking through storm clouds. "Hi, Clara," Amelia said, crouching down to the little girl's level. "It's very nice to meet you. Are you ready to get warm?" Clara nodded eagerly, and Amelia felt something in her chest loosen for the first time in months. Leading them across the street and up the 2 flights of stairs to her apartment, she found herself wondering what had brought them to this point. Daniel's clothes, though worn, were well made. His speech was educated, refined. These weren't people who had been homeless for long, and something about their situation felt temporary, as if they were caught between one life and another. Her apartment was exactly as she'd left it that morning. Small, cluttered, and showing the signs of someone who had been too exhausted to keep up with housework. Magazines and medical pamphlets were scattered across the coffee table. Dirty dishes sat in the sink, and her unmade bed was visible through the open door of what generously could be called a bedroom, but was really just an alcove with a curtain. "It's not much," Amelia said, suddenly self-conscious about the state of her home. "But the heater works, and I think I have some extra blankets somewhere." Daniel was looking around the apartment with an expression she couldn't quite read. There was something almost professional in the way his eyes took in the layout, the furniture, the small details that most people wouldn't notice. But then Clara tugged on his coat, and his attention snapped back to his daughter. "It's perfect," he said simply, and the sincerity in his voice made Amelia's throat tight with unexpected emotion. She busied herself pulling extra blankets from the closet and clearing space on the small couch that would serve as their bed for the night. Clara wandered over to the window, pressing her small hands against the glass as she watched the snow continue to fall. "It's really coming down out there," Daniel observed, moving to stand beside his daughter. The forecast said it might be the worst storm of the season. Amelia glanced outside and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. If she hadn't found them when she did, if she had simply gone straight home without looking back. She pushed the thought away. They were here now, safe and warm, and that was what mattered. "Are you hungry?" she asked, opening her refrigerator and taking stock of what she had to offer. The contents were sparse, some leftover takeout, a few eggs, half a loaf of bread, and the remnants of groceries she'd bought before her world fell apart that morning. "I don't have much, but I could make scrambled eggs, or there's some Chinese food from yesterday." "We don't want to take your food," Daniel said quickly, but Clara was already nodding enthusiastically at the mention of eggs. "I was going to make dinner anyway," Amelia lied smoothly. "It's no trouble at all." As she moved around the small kitchen, cracking eggs into a bowl and buttering bread for toast, she became aware of Daniel watching her with an intensity that made her self-conscious. When she glanced over, she found him studying her face as if trying to memorize it. "What?" she asked, pausing in her whisking. "Nothing, I just—" He shook his head, looking almost embarrassed. "I can't remember the last time someone was kind to us without wanting something in return. It's been a long time since we met someone like you." Amelia felt her cheeks warm and she turned back to the stove to hide her reaction. "I'm nothing special. Anyone would have done the same thing." "No," Daniel said quietly, and there was something in his voice that made her look at him again. "They wouldn't have. Trust me on that." There was a story there, she realized. Pain and disappointment and probably betrayal, all wrapped up in the careful way he spoke about other people. But she didn't pry. She had her own stories, her own reasons for understanding what it felt like when the world let you down. Clara had found the small collection of books on Amelia's shelf and was flipping through a picture book about a princess and a dragon. The sight of the little girl, finally warm and safe, doing something as normal as reading, brought an unexpected wave of peace to Amelia's chest. "She's beautiful," Amelia said as she plated the eggs. "How old is she?" "7." Daniel replied, his voice softening as he watched his daughter. "She'll be 8 next month. She's—" He paused, seeming to struggle with something. "She's been through a lot lately. We both have." Amelia nodded, understanding the weight of words unspoken. She served the simple meal on her mismatched plates, and they ate together at her small table, Clara chattering about the book she was reading and asking questions about the pictures on Amelia's walls. It was such a normal scene, a family having dinner together, but Amelia could sense the undercurrent of something deeper. The way Daniel's eyes never quite stopped scanning the room as if he was still expecting something to go wrong. The way Clara unconsciously stayed close to her father, never straying more than a few feet from his side. After dinner, as Amelia was washing dishes, she heard a strange sound from the living room. Looking over, she saw Daniel crouched beside the coffee table doing something with a screwdriver he'd apparently produced from somewhere. "What are you doing?" she asked, drying her hands on a dish towel. "Your table leg was loose," he said without looking up. "I noticed it wobbling during dinner, and there's a drip in your kitchen faucet that just needs the washer tightened." Amelia watched in amazement as he efficiently fixed the table, then moved to the kitchen sink and somehow stopped the persistent drip that had been driving her crazy for weeks. His movements were confident, practiced, and she found herself wondering what he had done before, whatever circumstances had brought him to her doorstep. "You don't have to," she started, but he held up a hand. "Please," he said simply. "Let me do this. It's the least I can offer in return for your kindness." While Daniel worked, Clara had found Amelia's small basket of craft supplies, left over from a brief period when she'd thought having a hobby might help with the stress of her mother's illness. The little girl was carefully sorting through buttons and ribbons with the intense concentration that only children could bring to such tasks. "Can I make something?" Clara asked, holding up a length of green ribbon. "Of course," Amelia said, settling beside her on the couch. "What would you like to make?" "A bracelet," Clara announced. "For you, to say thank you for letting us stay here." Amelia's heart clenched as she watched the little girl's small fingers working to tie knots in the ribbon, adding buttons and a few small beads with the determination of someone creating a masterpiece. The bracelet was crooked, the knots uneven, and absolutely perfect. "There," Clara said proudly, holding up her creation. "It's for you to remember us when we're gone." The simple statement hit Amelia harder than she'd expected. Of course they would be gone. This was temporary, a single night of shelter from the storm. Tomorrow, Daniel and Clara would move on to whatever came next in their lives, and she would return to her own struggles, the job search, the bills, the constant worry about her mother's declining health. But as Clara carefully tied the bracelet around Amelia's wrist, she realized that she didn't want them to leave. For the first time in months, her apartment felt like a home instead of just a place to sleep between crises. For the first time since her mother's diagnosis, she felt useful, needed in a way that had nothing to do with medical appointments or insurance forms. "It's beautiful," Amelia said, admiring the uneven knots and mismatched buttons. "I love it." Clara beamed with pride, and Daniel looked up from where he was now examining a loose hinge on one of her kitchen cabinets. "Clara has always been good with her hands," he said, his voice warm with paternal pride. She makes jewelry for... He paused, his expression clouding over. She used to make jewelry for her mother. The past tense hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle. Amelia felt her chest tighten with understanding and sympathy. She had wondered about Clara's mother, about why it was just the two of them facing the world alone. Now she knew, and the knowledge made her heart ache for both of them. I'm sure she would have loved this, Amelia said gently, touching the bracelet Clara had made for her. She would have, Daniel said quietly, his voice thick with emotion he was trying to control. She loved Clara's art projects. Our house used to be covered in her drawings and crafts. She said they were better than any expensive artwork. She was right, Amelia said firmly. This is the most beautiful bracelet I've ever owned. Clara snuggled closer to Amelia on the couch, her small body warm and trusting against Amelia's side. Will you wear it tomorrow? She asked sleepily. I'll wear it every day, Amelia promised and meant it. As the evening wore on, the storm outside seemed to intensify. The wind howled around the building, rattling windows and sending snow swirling in dizzying patterns past the streetlights. Inside the small apartment, though, a different kind of warmth had settled over them. Daniel had finished his repairs and joined them on the couch. Clara curled up between him and Amelia as they watched an old movie on Amelia's laptop. It was during a quiet moment in the film that Clara spoke up, her voice drowsy but content. Daddy, she said, not taking her eyes off the screen. I like her. I like her too, sweetheart, Daniel replied, and when Amelia glanced over, she found him looking at her with an expression that made her pulse quicken. There was gratitude there, yes, but something else as well. Something that spoke of connection and possibility, and the kind of recognition that happens when two people who have been carrying heavy burdens alone suddenly realize they don't have to. But it was temporary, Amelia reminded herself. Tomorrow they would be gone, and she would be alone again, with her problems and her fears, and her increasingly uncertain future. Tonight was just a brief interlude, a moment of warmth, in what had been a very cold season of her life. Still, as Clara's breathing evened out in sleep, and Daniel's presence filled the small space with a sense of safety she hadn't felt in months, Amelia allowed herself to imagine what it might be like if this wasn't temporary. What it might be like to come home to people who cared about her, to have someone to share the daily struggles and small victories with, to be part of something larger than her own survival. But those were dangerous thoughts, she knew. Hope was a luxury she couldn't afford right now, not when everything in her life felt so precarious. So she pushed the fantasies away and focused on the reality of the moment, a stranger and his daughter sleeping peacefully in her living room. The gentle sound of their breathing mixing with the wind outside, and the strange sense of rightness that seemed to have settled over them all. When she finally carried the sleeping Clara to her own bed and gave Daniel a pillow and extra blankets for the couch, she tried not to think about how natural it felt, how much like a family they seemed despite having known each other for only a few hours. Thank you, Daniel said again as she was about to retreat to her bedroom. I know I keep saying it, but I need you to understand what you did tonight. It means everything. Clara hasn't smiled like that in a very long time. She's a special little girl, Amelia replied. You're a good father, Daniel. Whatever brought you here, whatever you're going through, it's obvious how much you love her. I'd do anything for her, he said simply. Anything at all. There was something in the way he said it that made Amelia think there was more to their story than simple homelessness or bad luck. But she didn't ask. Some stories revealed themselves in their own time, And tonight was about shelter and safety, not explanations. "Good night, Daniel," she said softly. "Good night, Amelia. And thank you for everything." As she lay in her bed later listening to the storm rage outside and the quiet sounds of her unexpected guests settling in for the night, Amelia found herself staring at the bracelet Clara had made for her. In the dim light from the street lamp outside her window, the green ribbon looked almost luminous, and the mismatched buttons caught what little light there was like tiny stars. She thought about the day she'd had losing her job, facing an uncertain future, feeling like everything was falling apart around her. And then these two strangers had appeared, and somehow in the space of a few hours, she felt more hopeful than she had in months. Not because her problems had been solved, but because she had remembered something important about herself, that she was the kind of person who would see a child shivering in the cold and offer shelter regardless of the cost to herself. That was worth something. That mattered. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside her small apartment, Amelia felt a peace she hadn't experienced in a very long time. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new uncertainties, but tonight she had done something good. Tonight, she had made a difference in two lives that needed it desperately. And sometimes, she thought as sleep finally claimed her, that was enough. But even as she drifted off, Amelia couldn't shake the feeling that this night was more than just a random act of kindness. There was something about Daniel, something in his eyes, and the way he carried himself, that suggested their meeting was more significant than it appeared. She couldn't put her finger on what it was, but there was a sense of destiny about the whole evening, as if the storm had brought them together for reasons that went beyond simple chance. Time would tell if that feeling was just wishful thinking or something more. But for now, with the green ribbon bracelet warm against her wrist and the sound of gentle breathing from the next room, Amelia allowed herself to believe that sometimes, when you opened your door to help someone else, you might just be opening it to something wonderful for yourself as well. The last thing she remembered before sleep took her was the sound of Clara's laughter during dinner, bright and pure and full of the kind of joy that could light up even the darkest winter night. Whatever tomorrow brought, she would carry that sound with her, a reminder that kindness could create magic in the most unexpected ways. And in the living room, Daniel lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the woman who had saved them without knowing who they really were or what their presence in her life might mean. He thought about the board meeting he was supposed to attend on Monday, about the company he was meant to transform, about the life he was trying to rebuild for Clara after losing everything that mattered. But mostly, he thought about Amelia's smile when Clara had given her the bracelet, and the way she had looked at his daughter, not with pity or awkwardness, but with genuine warmth and acceptance. It had been so long since anyone had looked at Clara that Wei had treated her like a normal little girl instead of an object of sympathy or curiosity. Perhaps Daniel thought, as the storm finally began to quiet outside, this was exactly where they were meant to be. Perhaps everything that had brought them to this moment, all the loss and pain and desperate searching, had been leading them here to this small apartment and this remarkable woman who had opened her door to strangers without question. But that was a hope for tomorrow. Tonight was about rest and warmth and the unexpected gift of human kindness when it was needed most. And as Daniel finally drifted off to sleep on Amelia's couch, he found himself smiling for the first time in months, already planning how he might repay the debt of gratitude he owed to the angel who had saved them from the storm. The first rays of dawn filtered through Amelia's thin curtains, casting gentle shadows across the living room where Daniel had spent the night. She woke to the sound of quiet movement and the aroma of coffee brewing, a smell that seemed impossible given that she was certain she'd run out of coffee beans 3 days ago. Padding softly to the kitchen in her robe, Amelia found Daniel standing at her stove fully dressed and looking remarkably put together for someone who had slept on a couch. Clara sat at the small table, her blonde hair neatly braided, coloring in what appeared to be one of Amelia's old notebooks, with crayons that definitely hadn't been in her apartment the night before. "Good morning," Daniel said, turning with a gentle smile that made her heart skip in a way that had nothing to do with caffeine. "I hope you don't mind. I found some coffee in your freezer and thought you might want some when you woke up." Amelia blinked, trying to process the domestic scene before her. In the harsh light of morning, Daniel looked different than he had the night before. The exhaustion was still there in the slight shadows under his eyes. But there was something else now, a quiet confidence that seemed at odds with his circumstances. His clothes, which she had assumed were simply well-made second-hand purchases, now struck her as expensive, the kind of tailored fit that suggested they had been made specifically for him. "You found coffee?" she asked, accepting the steaming mug he offered her. The first sip revealed that it wasn't just any coffee, it was good coffee, better than anything she'd had in her apartment in months. "I may have made a quick run to the corner store while you were sleeping," Daniel admitted, looking almost sheepish. "I wanted to repay you somehow for last night, and I noticed you were out of a few things." Amelia glanced around her kitchen and noticed other changes: fresh bread on the counter, eggs in a carton that definitely hadn't been there yesterday, and what looked like the ingredients for a proper breakfast. Her first instinct was to protest, to worry about how much money he had spent when he clearly couldn't afford it, but something in his expression stopped her. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. "Yes, I did," he replied, his voice firm but gentle. "You gave us shelter when we had nowhere else to go. The least I can do is make sure you have breakfast." Clara looked up from her drawing, beaming at Amelia, with the kind of pure joy that only children could radiate so early in the morning. "Look what I made for you," she announced, holding up the notebook. Amelia moved closer and felt her breath catch in her throat. Clara had drawn a picture of the three of them standing together under a sky full of stars, their hands linked, smiles on all their faces. Above them, in careful 7-year-old lettering, she had written, "Our family for one night." "It's beautiful, sweetheart." Amelia managed her voice thick with emotion she hadn't expected to feel so intensely. "Can I keep it?" "Of course," Clara said proudly. "It's for you to remember us." The innocent words hit Amelia like a physical blow, reminding her that this magical interlude was temporary. These people who had somehow made her tiny apartment feel like a home would be walking out of her life in a matter of hours, and she would go back to being alone with her unemployment and her fears and her slowly dying mother. Daniel seemed to sense her shift in mood because he moved closer, his presence warm and reassuring at her side. "Amelia," he said quietly, "I need you to know that what you did for us last night, it changed something. Clara hasn't drawn a picture like that since—" He paused, gathering himself. "Since her mother died. You gave her something back that I thought was lost forever." The weight of his words settled over her like a blanket, bringing both comfort and an ache she couldn't quite name. She looked down at Clara's drawing again, at the three figures holding hands under the starlit sky, and wondered if this was what it felt like to glimpse a life you could never have. "How long ago?" she asked gently, not wanting to pry but needing to understand. 8 months. Daniel replied, his voice carefully controlled. "Leukemia. It was fast. By the time they caught it, there wasn't much time left." Amelia's heart clenched with recognition and sympathy. She thought of her own mother fighting her own battle with cancer and the helpless rage that came with watching someone you love suffer while being unable to fix it. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, and meant it with every fiber of her being. Thank you, Daniel said simply. It's been hard. Harder than I ever imagined. Everything fell apart after Sarah died, my work, our home, our entire life. I thought I could handle it all, but... He trailed off, looking at Clara with an expression of such profound love and protectiveness that it took Amelia's breath away. This was a man who would move mountains for his daughter, who had already sacrificed everything he had to try to give her some semblance of security and happiness. But you're handling it, Amelia said firmly. You're here, you're taking care of her, you're keeping her safe. That's what matters. Daniel's smile was sad but grateful. Some days it doesn't feel like enough. Some days it feels like I'm failing her in every possible way. You're not, Amelia said with conviction that surprised her. Trust me on that. She knows how much you love her. It's written all over her face every time she looks at you. As if to prove her point, Clara bounced up from her chair and wrapped her arms around Daniel's waist, hugging him with the fierce affection that only children could offer so freely. "Daddy, can we have pancakes?" she asked, looking up at him with hopeful eyes. "Of course, sweetheart," Daniel said, running his hand through her hair with infinite tenderness. "Amelia, would you like to join us for breakfast? I make a mean pancake, or so I've been told." The invitation hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither of them wanted to examine too closely. Amelia knew she should probably decline, should start putting distance between herself and these people who were making her feel things she couldn't afford to feel. But Clara was looking at her with such hope, and Daniel's eyes held a warmth that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't experienced in far too long. "I'd love pancakes," she heard herself say. The next hour passed in a blur of domestic normalcy that felt both foreign and perfectly natural. Daniel moved around her kitchen with an ease that suggested he was comfortable in any space, while Clara chattered about everything and nothing, her previous shyness completely forgotten. Amelia found herself laughing more than she had in months, drawn into their easy banter, and Clara's infectious enthusiasm for everything, from the patterns the syrup made on her pancakes to the way the morning light created rainbows in the water glasses. It was during this peaceful breakfast that Daniel's phone buzzed with an incoming call. Amelia watched his expression change as he glanced at the screen, a look of resignation and something that might have been dread crossing his features. "I'm sorry," he said, standing from the table. "I need to take this. It'll just be a minute." He stepped into the living room, but the apartment was small enough that Amelia could hear fragments of the conversation, even though Daniel was clearly trying to keep his voice low. "Yes, I understand the timeline. No, I'll be there. Of course I realize what's at stake." There was something in his tone that didn't match the image of a man who had been homeless just hours before. Authority, a familiarity with what sounded like business terminology that made Amelia's curiosity spike. When he returned to the kitchen, his expression was carefully neutral, but she could see tension in the set of his shoulders. "Everything okay?" she asked gently. "Yes," he said quickly, perhaps too quickly. "Just logistics for our next move." Clara looked up from her pancakes with concern. "Do we have to leave soon, Daddy?" Daniel's expression softened as he looked at his daughter. "Soon, sweetheart, but not yet." The reminder that their time was limited cast a shadow over the warm atmosphere they'd created. Amelia found herself searching for reasons to delay their departure, ways to extend this unexpected gift of companionship just a little longer. "Would you like me to show you around the neighborhood?" she offered, surprised by her own boldness. "There's a nice park a few blocks away, and Clara might enjoy seeing the ducks on the pond." Clara's face lit up with excitement. "Can we, Daddy, please?" Daniel hesitated, glancing at his phone again, with an expression Amelia couldn't quite read. "I suppose we have a little time," he said finally. "If you're sure you don't mind." "I don't mind at all," Amelia said, and realized she meant it completely. The thought of spending more time with them, of seeing Clara's joy at something as simple as feeding ducks, filled her with a warmth that had nothing to do with the coffee. The morning had turned crisp but clear, the storm of the previous night leaving the city looking washed and bright. Snow clung to the trees and rooftops, creating a winter wonderland that made Clara gasp with delight as they stepped outside. "It's so pretty," she exclaimed, spinning in a circle with her arms outstretched to catch the snowflakes that were still drifting down from the gray sky. Watching her dance in the snow, Amelia was struck by the resilience of children, their ability to find joy in the moment, despite whatever darkness might be lurking in their lives. Clara had lost her mother, had been living in uncertainty and instability, yet here she was, laughing at the simple pleasure of snow on her face. "She's remarkable," Amelia said to Daniel as they walked toward the park. "She is," he agreed, his voice full of pride and love. "Sometimes I think she's stronger than I am. She's been my anchor through all of this, even though she doesn't know it." They walked in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching Clara skip ahead of them, pointing out icicles and snow-covered benches, and all the small wonders that an urban winter could provide. It felt natural, Amelia realized, walking with Daniel, matching his pace, sharing the simple pleasure of watching his daughter discover magic in an ordinary morning. "Can I ask you something?" Daniel said as they neared the park. "Of course." "Last night when you saw us, what made you stop? Most people would have kept walking, especially someone in your situation." Amelia considered the question, trying to put into words something she hadn't fully examined herself. "I don't know exactly," she said slowly. "I guess I know what it's like to feel helpless, to watch someone you love suffer and not be able to fix it. When I saw Clara shivering like that, I couldn't just walk away." Daniel stopped walking and turned to face her, his dark eyes intense and searching. "Someone you love is suffering." The concern in his voice was so genuine that Amelia felt her carefully constructed walls begin to crumble. "My mother," she said quietly. "Cancer. It's not going well." "I'm sorry," Daniel said, and she could hear the weight of his own loss in those simple words. "How long has she been sick?" 2 years, Amelia replied, surprised at how easily the words came. "It's been consuming. Everything else in my life has kind of fallen apart because I can't focus on anything except taking care of her. That's actually why I lost my job yesterday. Too many missed days, too many times I couldn't give them my full attention." "You lost your job yesterday." Daniel's voice carried a note of something she couldn't identify. "And you still invited strangers into your home." Amelia shrugged, feeling embarrassed by the implication of her own recklessness. "It seemed like the right thing to do. Besides, it's not like my situation could get much worse." But even as she said it, she realized it wasn't entirely true. Meeting Daniel and Clara had somehow made her feel more hopeful about her circumstances, not worse. There was something about their presence that made her problems seem more manageable, her future less bleak. "You're extraordinary," Daniel said softly, and the sincerity in his voice made her cheeks warm. Before she could respond, Clara came running back to them, her cheeks pink with cold and excitement. "The ducks are here," she announced, grabbing both their hands and pulling them toward the pond. The next hour passed in a blur of simple pleasures. They fed the ducks with bread Daniel had somehow acquired during his mysterious morning shopping trip, built a small snowman that Clara insisted needed a face made of pebbles she collected from around the pond, and played a game of snow angels that left all three of them laughing and breathless. Watching Daniel with his daughter Amelia saw a different side of him emerge. The careful control he seemed to maintain most of the time melted away, replaced by pure joy in Clara's happiness. He was patient with her endless questions, encouraging of her creative ideas for improving their snowman, and gentle when she slipped on the icy ground and scraped her knee. "You're a wonderful father," Amelia told him, as Clara ran ahead to examine something she'd spotted near the playground. "I try," Daniel said, but she could see the doubt in his eyes. "Some days, I wonder if I'm enough for her, if I can give her everything she needs." "Love is everything she needs," Amelia said firmly. "Everything else is just details." Daniel smiled at that, a real smile that transformed his entire face and made her heart do something acrobatic in her chest. "You sound like you speak from experience." "My mother raised me alone," Amelia explained. "My father left when I was Clara's age. I used to worry that I was missing out on something, that our little family wasn't complete somehow. But my mother showed me that love doesn't require a perfect setup. It just requires showing up every day no matter what." "And now you're showing up for her," Daniel observed. "Trying to," Amelia said, thinking of all the ways she felt like she was failing. "It's harder than I thought it would be. Watching someone you love fade away, piece by piece." Daniel reached over and took her hand, his fingers warm despite the cold air. "It is hard," he said quietly. "The hardest thing I've ever done. But you're not alone in it, even when it feels like you are." The simple contact, the warmth of his hand holding hers, sent a wave of comfort through her that she hadn't realized she desperately needed. For months, she had been carrying the weight of her mother's illness alone, shouldering the fear and responsibility and grief without anyone to share the burden. But in this moment, holding hands with a man she had known for less than 24 hours, she felt understood in a way that made her throat tight with emotion. "Daddy, Amelia, come see." Clara's voice broke the spell, and they separated, but the warmth of the connection lingered. Clara had discovered the playground and was hanging upside down from the monkey bars, her blonde hair swinging like a pendulum as she grinned at them. "Look what I can do." They spent another half hour at the playground, pushing Clara on the swings and watching her navigate the jungle gym with the fearless confidence of childhood. As they played, Amelia found herself storing up memories like a squirrel preparing for winter. The sound of Clara's laughter as she went down the slide, the way Daniel's eyes crinkled when he smiled, the feeling of being part of something larger than her own struggles. But eventually, the cold began to seep through their clothes, and Clara's energy started to flag. As they walked back toward Amelia's apartment, she could feel the weight of impending goodbye settling over them like a heavy blanket. "This has been the best morning," Clara announced, skipping between them and reaching for both their hands. "I wish we could stay forever." The innocent words hit Amelia like a physical blow, giving voice to the wish she hadn't dared to articulate even to herself. She did want them to stay forever, wanted to wake up every morning to the sound of Clara's laughter and the sight of Daniel making coffee in her kitchen. She wanted to be part of their story, to help them heal from their loss and build something new together. But that was a fantasy, she reminded herself firmly. These were strangers who had needed shelter for a single night, nothing more. Whatever connection she felt, whatever hope had begun to bloom in her chest, it was based on a false intimacy born of extraordinary circumstances. Back at her apartment, the reality of departure began to assert itself. Daniel gathered their few belongings, while Clara carefully folded the extra blankets they had used, her small face serious with the concentration of someone determined to be helpful. "Thank you," Daniel said, as he prepared to leave, his voice formal in a way that created distance between them. "For everything. I hope your situation improves soon." It was polite, grateful, and completely inadequate for what had passed between them. Amelia felt something inside her chest crack at the careful neutrality of his tone, the way he was already pulling back, already preparing to walk out of her life, as if the past 24 hours had been nothing more than a kind gesture between strangers. "Wait," she said, the word escaping before she could stop it. Do you have somewhere to go? Somewhere safe?" Daniel's expression flickered, and for a moment she saw uncertainty there, quickly masked. "We'll be fine," he said, but it sounded like something he was trying to convince himself of as much as her. "Because if you need more time—" Amelia started, then stopped, unsure how to finish the sentence. What was she offering? A longer stay? Permanent refuge? She didn't even know these people, had no idea what their story really was, or what kind of trouble they might be running from. But Clara was looking up at her with such hope, and Daniel's careful composure was wavering, and before she could think better of it, she heard herself saying, "You could stay another night, if you need to." "We couldn't impose on you any longer," Daniel said quickly, but Amelia could hear the longing beneath the polite refusal. "You're not imposing," she said firmly. You're helping, actually. This place has felt more like a home in the past day than it has in months. I'd like you to stay if you want to." Clara looked between them with bright, hopeful eyes. "Can we, Daddy, please?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment, and Amelia could see him wrestling with something internal, some conflict she couldn't understand. Finally, he looked up at her, and the expression in his dark eyes was so vulnerable it made her breath catch. "Are you sure?" he asked softly. "I'm sure," she said, and realized she had never meant anything more in her life. The relief that washed over Daniel's face was so profound that Amelia wondered what exactly he had been dreading about leaving. But before she could ask, Clara was throwing her arms around Amelia's waist, hugging her with the fierce joy of a child whose wish had been granted. "Thank you, thank you, thank you," Clara said, her voice muffled against Amelia's sweater. As Amelia hugged the little girl back, she caught Daniel's eye over Clara's head and saw something there that made her heart race. Gratitude, yes, but also something deeper, something that looked dangerously like the kind of feelings that could change everything. But even as the thought crossed her mind, Daniel's phone buzzed again, and she watched his expression change as he read the message. The warmth and vulnerability disappeared, replaced by something harder, more distant. "I need to make a call," he said abruptly, already moving toward the door. "I'll be right back." He was gone before Amelia could respond, leaving her alone with Clara, and a growing sense that there was more to Daniel's story than he was telling her. Through the window, she could see him pacing on the sidewalk, below his phone pressed to his ear, his free hand gesturing emphatically as he spoke. "Is your daddy okay?" Clara asked, following Amelia's gaze to the window. "I think so, sweetheart," Amelia said, though she wasn't sure she believed it. Sometimes grown-ups have complicated things to deal with. "Like when Mommy was sick," Clara said matter-of-factly, settling on the couch with the book she had been reading the night before. The casual reference to her mother's illness hit Amelia unexpectedly, reminding her once again of how much loss this little girl had already experienced. It made her even more determined to provide whatever stability and comfort she could, for as long as they would let her. When Daniel returned 20 minutes later, his expression was unreadable, but Amelia could sense tension radiating from him like heat from a furnace. "Everything okay?" she asked gently. "Fine," he said, but the word came out clipped, unconvincing. "Just work things. Nothing to worry about." But Amelia was beginning to worry because something about Daniel wasn't adding up. The expensive clothes, the business calls, the way he carried himself when he thought no one was watching. None of it fit with the image of someone who had been homeless and desperate just a day before. Still, she didn't push. Everyone had secrets, and if Daniel wanted to keep his, that was his right. What mattered was that he and Clara were safe, that they had somewhere warm to sleep for another night, that Clara was smiling and drawing pictures and acting like the carefree child she deserved to be. The rest of the day passed quietly, comfortably. Daniel insisted on cooking dinner, producing ingredients that seemed to materialize from nowhere, and creating a meal that was far more sophisticated than anything Amelia had eaten in her own apartment in months. Clara helped set the table, chattering about the ducks they had seen and the snowman they had built, her happiness infectious and bright. As evening fell and they settled in for their second night together, Amelia found herself thinking about the bracelet Clara had made for her, still wrapped around her wrist. The little girl had said it was to remember them when they were gone, but now Amelia wondered if perhaps it was meant for something else entirely. Perhaps it was meant to remind her that sometimes, when you opened your door to help someone else, you discovered that you were the one who needed saving. Perhaps it was meant to mark the beginning of something new, something that would change all their lives in ways they couldn't yet imagine. But those were thoughts for tomorrow, she decided, as she prepared for bed. Tonight was about holding on to the warmth and connection they had built, about savoring the sound of quiet conversation from the living room, and the knowledge that she wasn't alone in her small apartment. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought. But tonight, for the second time, Amelia fell asleep, feeling like she was part of something larger than herself, something that might just be the beginning of the life she had always wanted, but never dared to hope for. In the living room, Daniel lay awake once again, but this time his thoughts were even more complicated than they had been the night before. The phone calls, the messages, the mounting pressure from the board, it was all closing in faster than he had anticipated. Monday was coming, and with it a reckoning he wasn't sure he was ready for. But lying there in the dark, listening to the quiet sounds of the apartment settling around him, he found himself thinking less about corporate responsibilities and more about the woman sleeping in the next room. Amelia had shown him kindness when he needed it most, had opened her home and her heart to a stranger and his daughter without asking for anything in return. She deserved the truth, he knew. She deserved to know who he really was, what Monday would bring, what his presence in her life might mean. But the truth was complicated, and he wasn't sure how to explain it without risking everything they had built in these 2 precious days. For now, he decided it was enough to be here, to be Daniel the grateful stranger, rather than Daniel Morrison, incoming CEO of Morrison and Associates. Tomorrow would demand its own truths, but tonight belonged to this strange and wonderful family they had somehow become, even if only temporarily, even if only for now. The third morning brought with it a sense of urgency that Daniel could no longer ignore. His phone had been buzzing relentlessly since 5 a.m., each call more insistent than the last. As he stood in Amelia's tiny bathroom, splashing cold water on his face and trying to prepare himself for what lay ahead, he caught sight of his reflection in the mirror. The man staring back at him looked like a stranger, someone caught between 2 worlds, 2 identities, 2 completely different futures. In just a few hours, he would have to walk into the boardroom of Morrison and Associates and officially assume the role that had been thrust upon him 8 months ago when his world had collapsed along with Sarah's final breath. The company his grandfather had built, that his father had expanded, and that he had been groomed to lead since childhood, was waiting for him to step into shoes he wasn't sure he was ready to fill. But here, enter in this cramped bathroom in a studio apartment that cost less than what he used to spend on lunch, he wasn't Daniel Morrison, heir to a corporate empire. He was simply Daniel, a man who had found unexpected sanctuary in the kindness of a stranger. "Daddy," Clara's sleepy voice drifted through the thin door. "Are you okay in there?" I'm fine, sweetheart, he called back, though the words felt like lies on his tongue. I'll be out in just a minute. When he emerged, he found Clara sitting at the small table with Amelia, both of them sharing a bowl of cereal and talking in the easy, comfortable way that had developed over their brief time together. The sight of them, his daughter's blonde head bent close to Amelia's brown one, their voices mixing in quiet conversation, made something in his chest tighten painfully. "Good morning," Amelia said, looking up with a smile that seemed to light up the entire room. "I was just telling Clara about the art museum downtown. They have a children's section that I thought she might enjoy." "Can we go, Daddy?" Clara asked, her eyes bright with excitement. "Amelia says they have paintings of horses and dragons." Daniel's phone buzzed again, and he saw the name Board of Directors flash across the screen. He declined the call, but not before Amelia noticed the tension that crossed his features. "You've been getting a lot of calls," she observed gently. "Is everything all right with your work situation?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that Daniel wasn't sure how to address. He had been dreading this moment, knowing that his carefully constructed facade was beginning to crack under the weight of reality. "Actually," he said slowly, setting his phone down on the counter, "there's something I need to tell you both." Clara looked up from her cereal with curious eyes, while Amelia's expression shifted to one of concern mixed with something that might have been fear. Daniel realized she was probably expecting him to tell her they were leaving, that their brief interlude was over. "I haven't been entirely honest about my situation." He began, his voice careful and measured. "It's not that I've lied to you exactly, but I haven't told you everything." Amelia's hand moved unconsciously to the green ribbon bracelet on her wrist, her fingers worrying at the uneven knots Clara had tied. "What do you mean?" Daniel sat down across from them, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. "I'm not homeless, Amelia. I haven't been for a while now. The night you found us, Clara and I were running away from something. From a life that felt too big, too overwhelming, too empty without Sarah." The words came out in a rush now, as if a dam had finally burst inside him. "My wife Clara's mother, she was everything to me. When she died, I fell apart completely. I couldn't work, couldn't think, couldn't be the father Clara needed. So I ran. I took Clara and I just disappeared for a while. We've been staying in hotels, camping anywhere but home because home felt like a tomb." Clara's spoon had stopped moving, and she was watching her father with wide, solemn eyes. Amelia's face had gone pale, and Daniel could see her processing this new information, trying to reconcile the man she thought she knew with the reality he was revealing. "That night you found us," he continued. "We had just checked out of our hotel room and I was trying to decide where to go next. Clara was exhausted. I was out of ideas, and then the storm hit. We took shelter under that cafe awning, and I was sitting there thinking that maybe this was rock bottom. Maybe this was as lost as we could get." "But you're not really homeless," Amelia said quietly, and he could hear something shifting in her voice. "No," Daniel admitted. "I'm not. Well, starting Monday, I'm supposed to be the CEO of Morrison & Associates." The silence that followed was deafening. Clara dropped her spoon into her bowl with a small clink, while Amelia stared at him with an expression of complete shock. "Morrison & Associates," she repeated slowly. "The company where I used to work." Daniel's heart sank as he saw understanding dawn in her eyes, followed quickly by something that looked like betrayal. "Yes," he said quietly. "The same company." Amelia stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "You're telling me that the night I lost my job at Morrison & Associates, I brought home the man who's going to be running the company. Amelia, please." "No," she said, her voice rising slightly. No, this is insane. What are the odds? What are the chances that out of all the people in this city I would help the one person who... She stopped, shaking her head in disbelief. Clara looked between them with confusion and growing distress. Daddy, why is Amelia upset? Did we do something wrong? Daniel reached for his daughter's hand, his heart breaking at the worry in her voice. No, sweetheart. You didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes grown-ups have complicated feelings about complicated situations. But I don't understand why she's mad, Clara said, tears beginning to form in her eyes. We like Amelia. She's nice to us. The sight of Clara's distress seemed to snap Amelia out of her shock. She immediately knelt down beside the little girl's chair, her anger dissolving into concern. I'm not mad at you, sweetie, she said, gently smoothing Clara's hair back from her face. I'm just surprised. Your daddy told me something I wasn't expecting, and sometimes when grown-ups are surprised, we need a minute to understand how we feel about it. Are you going to make us leave? Clara asked in a small voice. Amelia's eyes met Daniel's over Clara's head, and he could see the conflict playing out across her features. Part of her was angry, he could tell, feeling deceived and manipulated. But there was something else there too, a recognition sought of the genuine connection they had built despite the circumstances that had brought them together. No, Amelia said, finally, her voice soft but firm. I'm not going to make you leave, but your daddy and I need to talk about some things. Clara nodded solemnly, apparently satisfied with this explanation. Can I watch cartoons while you talk? Of course, Amelia said, helping her find something appropriate on the small television. Once Clara was settled on the couch, absorbed in her show, Amelia turned back to Daniel with an expression that was carefully controlled, but clearly turbulent underneath. Let's step outside, she said quietly. They stood on the small balcony off Amelia's living room, the December air sharp and cold around them. The city spread out below, bustling with Sunday morning activity, oblivious to the drama playing out in the tiny apartment above. I need to understand this, Amelia said, wrapping her arms around herself against the cold. You're telling me that you're Daniel Morrison, as in Morrison and Associates Morrison. My grandfather started the company, Daniel confirmed. My father expanded it. I was supposed to take over when he retired, but then Sarah got sick and everything changed. When she died, I wasn't ready to step into that role. The board has been patient, but they need leadership, and Monday is supposed to be my first official day as CEO. And you've been running around the city playing homeless man instead of preparing for that. Daniel flinched at the harsh edge in her voice, but he couldn't blame her for her anger. I know how it sounds. I know it looks like I was using you, but that's not what happened. When you found us that night, we were genuinely lost. Maybe not homeless in the traditional sense, but lost in every way that mattered. But you let me think. I let you think what you wanted to think because it was easier than explaining the truth, Daniel interrupted. Because the truth is complicated and messy, and I wasn't sure you'd understand. Amelia was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the city skyline. When she finally spoke, her voice was carefully controlled. Try me. Daniel took a deep breath, trying to find the words to explain what the past 8 months had been like. After Sarah died, I couldn't function. I couldn't sleep in our house, couldn't walk into my office, couldn't do anything that reminded me of the life we had planned together. The board kept calling, kept scheduling meetings, kept trying to drag me back into a world that felt meaningless without her. He ran his hands through his hair, the gesture betraying his frustration and exhaustion. So I ran. I took Clara and we just disappeared. We stayed in hotels, traveled, tried to find some kind of peace somewhere. But you can't run from grief, Amelia. It follows you everywhere. So what was that night? What were you doing under that cafe awning? That night, I had finally realized that running wasn't working. Clara needed stability, needed a home, needed me to be her father, instead of just another lost soul, dragging her around the country. We had checked out of our hotel that morning, and I was trying to decide whether to go back to Seattle, back to the life I'd been avoiding. Amelia turned to face him fully, and he could see her trying to process everything he was telling her. And then the storm hit. Daniel confirmed. And suddenly we were stuck under that awning, and Clara was so cold and tired, and I was sitting there thinking that maybe this was a sign. Maybe this was the universe telling me that I had reached the end of running away. And then I came along. And then you came along, he said, his voice softening. And you saw a man and a child who needed help, and you offered it without asking questions or expecting anything in return. Do you have any idea how long it had been since someone looked at me and saw just a person who needed kindness? Amelia's expression was beginning to soften, but he could still see the hurt and confusion in her eyes. But you should have told me who you were, especially once you knew where I had worked. You're right, Daniel said immediately. I should have. But by then I was selfish enough to want to hold on to what we had built. For the first time in months, Clara was happy. She was drawing again, laughing again, acting like a normal little girl instead of someone who had lost everything. And I felt human again when I was with you. The admission hung between them raw and honest. Amelia looked away, and Daniel could see her struggling with her own emotions. This changes everything, she said quietly. Does it? Daniel asked, stepping closer. Does it change the fact that Clara made you a bracelet because she wanted you to remember her? Does it change the conversations we've had, the way you've cared for her, the way you've made both of us feel like we might have a future worth living? It changes the fact that you'll be my boss, Amelia said, and there was something like panic in her voice. If I ever get my job back, you'll be the CEO. Do you understand how that complicates everything? Daniel felt his heart rate spike as an idea began to form in his mind, something that had been building subconsciously over the past 3 days, but that he was only now allowing himself to fully consider. What if you didn't have to get your job back? He said carefully. What if there was another option? Amelia looked at him with confusion. What do you mean? I mean, what if I offered you a position, a better position? Director of Employee Relations maybe, or head of our new community outreach program. The words were out before he could stop them, and he immediately saw Amelia's expression change from confusion to something much colder. Are you offering me a job because you feel sorry for me? She asked, her voice dangerously quiet. No, Daniel said quickly. I'm offering you a job because in 3 days, you've shown me more about leadership, about caring for people, about what really matters than I've learned in years of business school and board meetings. Daniel, listen to me, he said urgently. Morrison and Associates has been struggling for months. Morale is low, turnover is high, and nobody seems to remember that we're supposed to be serving people, not just profit margins. You've spent the last 2 years caring for your mother while working a demanding job. You opened your home to strangers because it was the right thing to do. You see people, Amelia. Really see them. That's exactly what this company needs. Amelia was shaking her head, backing away from him. I can't take a job from you, not after this. It would feel like I was being bought. You're not being bought, Daniel said desperately. You're being recognized. There's a difference. Is there? Amelia asked, and the pain in her voice made his chest tighten. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like the rich CEO is offering charity to the poor woman who helped him out of a jam. That's not what this is, Daniel said firmly. Amelia, in 3 days you've changed my life. You've given Clara back her smile, you've shown me what it means to open your heart to someone who needs it, and you've reminded me that there are still good people in the world. If I'm offering you a job, it's because I need someone like you in my company, not because I owe you something. They stared at each other across the small balcony, the weight of everything unsaid hanging heavily between them. Finally, Amelia shook her head and moved toward the door. I need some time to think, she said quietly. This is all. It's too much. Too fast. Of course, Daniel said, following her back inside. Take all the time you need. But even as he said it, he could feel the fragile connection they had built beginning to fracture under the weight of reality. Clara looked up from her cartoons as they came back in her young face, immediately picking up on the tension between the adults. Are you still mad? She asked Amelia with the directness that only children possessed. Amelia knelt down beside the couch, and Daniel could see her making an effort to push aside her own turmoil for Clara's sake. I'm not mad, sweetheart. I'm just thinking about some grown-up things. Are we still going to see the horses and dragons? Clara asked hopefully. Amelia glanced up at Daniel, and he could see her weighing her options. Part of her clearly wanted to retreat to put distance between herself and the complicated situation he had created. But Clara was looking at her with such hope, such trust, that it was obvious she couldn't bear to disappoint the little girl. Yes, she said finally. We can still go to the museum if your daddy thinks it's a good idea. I think it's a wonderful idea, Daniel said quickly, grateful for any opportunity to spend more time with her to try to repair the damage his revelation had caused. The museum trip was both wonderful and heartbreaking. Clara was enchanted by everything they saw, from the medieval armor to the impressionist paintings to the hands-on children's area where she could try her hand at different art techniques. But Daniel could feel the new distance between himself and Amelia, the careful politeness that had replaced their easy intimacy. She was still kind to Clara, still patient and encouraging. But when she looked at Daniel, there was a wariness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. The trust they had built was damaged, maybe irreparably, and he wasn't sure how to fix it. It was while Clara was absorbed in creating a clay sculpture that Amelia finally broached the subject that had been hanging over them all day. When do you have to be back? She asked quietly, not meeting his eyes. Tomorrow morning, Daniel said. The board meeting is at 9. And Clara, she'll come with me initially. I've arranged for a nanny to help with the transition, and there's a good school near the office that can take her mid-year. Amelia nodded, her expression carefully neutral. It sounds like you have everything figured out. I have the logistics figured out, Daniel corrected. That's not the same thing. They watched Clara work on her sculpture, a lopsided horse that she was decorating with tiny flowers pressed into the clay. Her tongue stuck out slightly as she concentrated, and her face was serene in a way that Daniel hadn't seen since before Sarah's death. She's going to be okay, Amelia said softly, following his gaze. She's resilient, and she has you. That's more than a lot of children have. She has me, Daniel agreed, but she also needs more. She needs stability, community, people who care about her beyond just me. She'll find that, Amelia said. Children are good at adapting, at finding their place in new situations. Daniel turned to face her, fully knowing that what he was about to say might push her away completely, but unable to stop himself from trying one more time. She could have that with you, he said quietly. We both could. Amelia's hands stilled where they had been absently straightening the art supplies on the table. Daniel, I know this is crazy, He continued, his voice urgent, but low enough that Clara couldn't hear. I know we've only known each other for 3 days, and I know the circumstances are complicated. But I also know that I haven't felt this connected to anyone since Sarah died. I know that Clara lights up around you in a way that she hasn't in months. And I know that what we've built together, even in such a short time, is real. It's not real, Amelia said, but her voice lacked conviction. It's a fantasy. It's 3 people playing house while hiding from their real lives. Is that what you think this is? Daniel asked. Because it doesn't feel like fantasy when I watch you braid Clara's hair in the morning. It doesn't feel like playing house when you listen to me talk about Sarah without judgment or jealousy. It feels like coming home. Amelia's eyes filled with tears that she quickly blinked away. Don't, she whispered. Don't make this harder than it already is. Why does it have to be hard? Daniel asked desperately. Why can't it just be possible? Because you're Daniel Morrison, Amelia said, finally meeting his eyes. And I'm nobody. I'm unemployed. I'm broke. My mother is dying, and I live in a studio apartment that's barely big enough for 1 person. We're not from the same world, Daniel. This weekend has been beautiful, but it's not real life. You're wrong, Daniel said firmly. You're not nobody. You're the woman who saved us when we needed it most. You're the woman who makes my daughter laugh, who listens without judgment, who sees people for who they really are instead of what they have or what they can offer. That's not nobody, Amelia. That's everything. Before she could respond, Clara came running over with her finished sculpture, her face glowing with pride. Look what I made, she announced, holding up the clay horse. It's for you, Amelia, to go with your bracelet. Amelia accepted the small sculpture with hands that trembled slightly, and Daniel could see her struggling to maintain her composure. It's beautiful, Clara, she managed. I love it. Now you'll have 2 things to remember us by, Clara said happily, apparently oblivious to the emotional undercurrents swirling around her. Yes, Amelia said quietly. I will. The ride home was subdued, Clara chattering about all the things she had seen, while the adults remained largely silent. Back at the apartment, the evening routine they had established over the past few days felt different, weighted with the knowledge that this was their last night together. Clara seemed to sense that something was ending because she clung more closely to both of them, asking for extra stories at bedtime, and insisting that Amelia sit on one side of the couch while Daniel sat on the other so she could be between them. I don't want tomorrow to come, she announced as Amelia was tucking her into the makeshift bed they had created. Why not, sweetheart? Amelia asked gently. Because then we have to leave and I like it here. I like being with you. Amelia's throat worked as she struggled to find words that would comfort Clara without making promises she couldn't keep. Sometimes we have to leave places we like, she said finally. But that doesn't mean we forget about them or that they weren't important. Will you forget about us? Clara asked, with the devastating directness of childhood. Never, Amelia said fiercely. I will never, ever forget about you. You and your daddy have given me something very special, and I'll carry it with me always. Clara seemed satisfied with this answer, and after a few more minutes of gentle conversation, she drifted off to sleep. Daniel and Amelia stood looking down at her peaceful face, both of them acutely aware that this was the last time they would share this simple domestic moment. She's going to ask about you, Daniel said quietly as they moved back to the living room. She's going to want to know when she'll see you again. And what will you tell her? Amelia asked. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, considering his options. I'll tell her the truth. That sometimes people come into our lives for a short time and make them better even if they can't stay. Amelia nodded, wrapping her arms around herself as if trying to hold herself together. That's good. That's honest. Amelia, Daniel said, moving closer. I want you to know that the job offer stands. Not because of this weekend, not because I feel obligated, but because I genuinely believe you would be an asset to the company. If you change your mind, I won't, Amelia said quickly. I can't. It wouldn't be right. For who? Daniel asked. For the company that would benefit from your skills and perspective. For the employees who would have someone fighting for them. For Clara, who would have someone she cares about nearby. For me, Amelia said quietly, it wouldn't be right for me. I need to rebuild my life on my own terms, not because someone felt sorry for me. Daniel wanted to argue, wanted to convince her that his feelings had nothing to do with pity and everything to do with genuine respect, and if he was being honest, something much deeper. But he could see the resolve in her eyes, the determination to maintain her independence, even if it meant walking away from something that could be wonderful. I understand, he said finally, though it nearly killed him to say it. They spent their final evening together quietly watching movies and talking about inconsequential things, both of them carefully avoiding the topic of what came next. When it was time for bed, Daniel lingered in the living room, reluctant to let go of what might be his last chance to talk to her alone. Amelia, he said, as she was preparing to go to her room, I need you to know that this weekend meeting, you being here with you, it's changed everything for me. It's reminded me what it feels like to be fully alive, fully present in my own life. Amelia stopped in the doorway, her back to him. For me too, she said softly. I haven't felt this connected to anything in a very long time. You and Clara, you've reminded me that there's still joy in the world, still reasons to hope. Then why does this feel like goodbye? Daniel asked. Amelia turned to face him, and he could see tears in her eyes that she was trying hard not to let fall. Because sometimes the most beautiful things are also the most temporary. That doesn't make them less beautiful. It just makes them precious. With that, she disappeared into her bedroom, leaving Daniel alone with his thoughts and the growing certainty that he was about to make the biggest mistake of his life by walking away from her. But he had responsibilities now, a company to run, a daughter, to care for a life that had been on hold for 8 months. Monday morning would come whether he was ready or not, and with it the beginning of a new chapter that might not have room for the magic they had created in this tiny apartment. Still, as he settled onto the couch for what would be his last night as simply Daniel, the man who had found sanctuary in a stranger's kindness, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to lose something infinitely more valuable than anything his grandfather's company could offer. In her bedroom, Amelia lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the clay horse Clara had made for her, sitting on her nightstand, next to the framed photo of her mother. The bracelet was still on her wrist, and she could feel its slight weight like a tangible reminder of everything she was about to lose. She had made the right choice, she told herself. Taking a job from Daniel would compromise everything they had shared, would turn their beautiful weekend into a transaction. But knowing she had made the right choice didn't make it hurt any less. Tomorrow, Daniel and Clara would walk out of her life and back into their own world, leaving her with memories and a clay horse and the knowledge that for 3 perfect days she had been part of something extraordinary. It would have to be enough. It would have to be enough, but as Monday morning dawned gray and cold, Amelia discovered that the ache in her chest had only deepened overnight. She lay in bed listening to the familiar sounds of Daniel and Clara preparing for their departure, the quiet murmur of their voices, the rustle of clothing being packed, the soft footsteps moving around her small living space one last time. When she finally emerged from her bedroom, she found them sitting at her tiny table sharing what appeared to be their final breakfast together. Daniel had somehow procured fresh bagels and cream cheese, and Clara was carefully spreading strawberry preserves on her half, while humming a tune that Amelia didn't recognize but that sounded inexplicably sad. "Good morning," Daniel said, his voice carefully neutral, but his eyes carrying the weight of everything unsaid between them. "Morning," Amelia replied, accepting the cup of coffee he offered her. The familiar ritual felt different now, tinged with finality. Clara looked up from her bagel with bright eyes that seemed determined to ignore the somber mood that had settled over the adults. "Amelia, will you help me pack my art supplies? I want to make sure my crayons don't get broken." "Of course, sweetheart," Amelia said, settling beside the little girl and helping her carefully wrap each crayon in tissue paper. As they worked together, she memorized the details, the way Clara's tongue poked out slightly when she concentrated, the careful precision with which she handled each colored pencil, the trust in her small hands as she placed each item in Amelia's care. "There," Clara announced when they had finished. "Now I can make pictures wherever we go." "That's right," Amelia said, her voice thick with emotion she was trying to control. "You can make beautiful art anywhere." Daniel was watching them with an expression that made Amelia's heart clench. There was love there, and gratitude, but also a deep sadness that seemed to mirror her own. When their eyes met across the table, she saw her own regret reflected back at her. The next hour passed too quickly and too slowly all at once. Daniel made phone calls while Clara showed Amelia her favorite drawings from the notebook she had been carrying, explaining each picture with the detailed storytelling that only children could manage. There was the duck from the pond, the snowman they had built, and on the last page a new drawing that made Amelia's throat close up completely. It was a picture of a house, not the apartment where they had stayed, but a real house with a white picket fence and flowers in the yard. In the windows, Clara had drawn 3 stick figures, a tall one with dark hair, a shorter one with brown hair, and a small one with yellow hair. Above the house, in careful lettering, she had written, "My family dream." "This is beautiful, Clara." Amelia managed her voice barely above a whisper. "It's my wish house," Clara explained matter-of-factly, "where we could all live together and be happy. Daddy says sometimes wishes don't come true, but I like to draw them anyway." The innocent words hit Amelia like a physical blow. Here was this precious child who had already lost so much dreaming of a family that included her a virtual stranger who had shown her kindness for 3 days. The trust and hope in Clara's young heart was both beautiful and heartbreaking. "Sometimes the most important wishes are the ones we carry in our hearts," Amelia said gently, "even if they don't come true exactly the way we picture them." Clara nodded solemnly, as if this made perfect sense to her 7-year-old logic. "Will you keep my picture so you can remember my wish?" "I'll treasure it," Amelia promised, and meant it with every fiber of her being. Daniel finished his final phone call and returned to the living room, his expression tense with the weight of impending responsibility. "The car will be here in 10 minutes, he announced quietly. The words fell into the room like stones into still water, creating ripples of finality that none of them could ignore. Clara's face fell slightly, though she tried to hide her disappointment behind a brave smile. "I guess it's time to go," she said, her voice smaller than usual. "I guess it is," Daniel agreed, moving to gather their few belongings. Amelia watched him pack their things, so few possessions for 3 days, that had felt like a lifetime. As he folded the extra blankets they had used, she found herself memorizing his movements, the way his hands worked efficiently but gently, the careful attention he paid to Clara's comfort, even in this moment of transition. "Daniel," she said suddenly, the words escaping before she could stop them. What you said yesterday about the job. He looked up hopefully, but she held up a hand to stop whatever response was forming. I can't take it, she continued, her voice firm, despite the tremor she felt inside. But I want you to know that it's not because I don't believe you meant it sincerely. It's because what we've shared here needs to remain separate from whatever professional relationship might exist between us in the future. Daniel's shoulders sagged slightly, but he nodded in understanding. I respect that, he said quietly, though I hope you know the offer wasn't made lightly. I know, Amelia replied, and I'm grateful for it more than you realize. But this, she gestured around the small apartment that had housed their temporary family. This was something pure. Something that happened because three people needed each other at exactly the right moment. I don't want to complicate that memory. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation, sharp and businesslike in the intimate atmosphere they had created. Daniel glanced at his watch and sighed. That'll be the car, he said, moving toward the door. The driver was a professional man in a dark suit who nodded politely, but didn't intrude on their obvious goodbye. He waited patiently by the elevator while they gathered their things and prepared for the final moments of their time together. Clara threw her arms around Amelia's waist, hugging her with the fierce intensity that only children could manage. I'm going to miss you so much, she whispered against Amelia's sweater. I'm going to miss you too, sweetheart, Amelia replied, kneeling down to Clara's level and taking her small hands in her own. But I want you to remember something important, okay? You are brave and kind and talented, and wherever you go, you're going to make friends and find people who love you. Your daddy loves you more than anything in the world, and that's something you can count on always. Clara nodded seriously, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Will you think about me sometimes? Every day, Amelia promised, and knew it was true. And when I look at the bracelet you made for me, I'll remember how lucky I was to know such a special little girl. Clara smiled through her tears and gave Amelia one more fierce hug before stepping back to take her father's hand. Daniel looked at Amelia for a long moment, and she could see him struggling with words that seemed inadequate for the magnitude of what they were leaving behind. Thank you, he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. For everything. For seeing us when we needed to be seen, for opening your home and your heart, for reminding me what kindness looks like. I'll never forget what you've given us. You've given me something too, Amelia replied, her own voice threatening to break. You've both reminded me that there's still magic in the world, still reasons to hope. That's not a small gift. For a moment it seemed like Daniel might step forward, might try to bridge the careful distance they had maintained. But then Clara tugged on his hand, and the spell was broken. We should go, he said quietly. Yes. Amelia agreed, though the word felt like giving up something essential. She watched from her window as they climbed into the black sedan, Clara pressing her small face against the glass to wave goodbye. As the car pulled away from the curb and disappeared into the Monday morning traffic, Amelia felt a piece of her heart go with them. The apartment felt impossibly empty after they left. The silence that had once been peaceful now seemed oppressive, broken only by the distant sounds of the city going about its business. Amelia moved through the space that had housed such joy and connection just hours before, collecting the small traces of their presence, a forgotten crayon under the coffee table, the impression in the couch cushions where they had all watched movies together, the faint scent of Daniel's cologne that still lingered in the air. She was washing the breakfast dishes when her phone rang, startling her out of her melancholy reverie. The number was unfamiliar, but something compelled her to answer. Hello, Miss Grant. This is Jennifer Walsh from Morrison & Associates Human Resources. I'm calling regarding your recent employment with our company. Amelia's heart skipped a beat. Yes, I understand there may have been some irregularities with your termination. We'd like to schedule a meeting with you to discuss your case and potential reinstatement. Would you be available to come in this afternoon? The irony was almost laughable. Just hours after Daniel had walked out of her life, his company was calling to offer her back the job she had lost. She wondered if this was his doing, if he had found a way to help her, despite her refusal of his direct offer. Yes, I could come in this afternoon, she heard herself saying. Excellent. 2 o'clock in conference room B. Ask for me at reception. After she hung up, Amelia stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror as she prepared for what could be the most important meeting of her professional life. The woman looking back at her seemed different somehow, sadder perhaps, but also stronger. The past 3 days had changed her in ways she was only beginning to understand. Morrison and Associates occupied 30 floors of a gleaming downtown tower, its lobby filled with expensive art and fresh flowers that spoke of corporate success and stability. As Amelia rode the elevator to the 23rd floor, she wondered if Daniel was somewhere in this building, already deep in meetings and executive decisions. Jennifer Walsh turned out to be a woman in her 50s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She led Amelia into a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a spectacular view of the city. Please have a seat, Jennifer said, settling across from Amelia with a thick folder in front of her. I've been reviewing your file, and I have to say your termination raises some concerns. Concerns? Amelia asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Your supervisor, Mr. Henderson, cited performance issues, but your work product has been consistently excellent. Your only attendance problems were related to documented family medical issues, which should have been protected under our family leave policies. Amelia felt a surge of anger at the confirmation that her firing had been unjust, but she kept her expression neutral. I see. We'd like to offer you reinstatement to your previous position, with back pay for the time you've been out, and a formal apology for the oversight. It was everything Amelia had hoped for just a week ago, her job back, financial security, vindication of her work ethic. But now, sitting in this sterile conference room, she found herself thinking not about professional advancement, but about a little girl's drawing of a dream house, and a man who had fixed her coffee table simply because it was the right thing to do. That's a generous offer, she said carefully, but I'd like to know something first. Was this review initiated by the new CEO? Jennifer's expression shifted slightly, becoming more guarded. Mr. Morrison did request a comprehensive review of recent personnel decisions, yes, but the irregularities in your case were apparent to anyone who looked closely. So Daniel had kept his word about not directly interfering, but he had found a way to help her anyway. The knowledge filled her with a warmth that was both comforting and heartbreaking. I appreciate the offer, Amelia said slowly, but I'm going to need some time to think about it. Jennifer looked surprised. Time to think about it. Ms. Grant, this is a significant opportunity. Your position in the company, your benefits, your career trajectory, all of that can be restored. I understand, Amelia said, standing from her chair. But I've learned recently that sometimes the most important decisions require careful consideration. May I have until the end of the week to give you an answer? Of course, Jennifer said, though she still looked puzzled. I'll call you Friday afternoon. As Amelia left the building, she found herself walking without any particular destination in mind. The city streets were busy with lunch-hour foot traffic, people hurrying between appointments and obligations, all of them seemingly sure of where they were going and what they wanted. She wasn't sure of anything anymore. The job offer was safe, practical, the smart choice for someone in her position. But accepting it would mean working in the same building as Daniel, possibly seeing him in elevators or meetings, being constantly reminded of what they had shared and lost. Could she handle that kind of proximity to someone who had become so important to her in such a short time? Her wandering feet carried her to the park, where she had taken Daniel and Clara just 2 days earlier. The pond was quiet now, the ducks huddled together against the December cold. She sat on the same bench where Daniel had told her she was extraordinary, where Clara had collected pebbles for their snowman's face, where they had been for a brief moment, something that felt like a family. Her phone buzzed with a text message, and her heart leaped before she saw that it was from her mother's nurse. "Your mom is asking for you. Good day today if you want to visit." The reminder of her mother's condition hit her like a cold splash of reality. While she had been living in a romantic fantasy for 3 days, her mother had been fighting her own battles, facing each day with courage that Amelia sometimes forgot to appreciate. The care facility was a 20-minute bus ride from downtown, a cheerful place that did its best to feel like home despite the clinical necessities. Amelia found her mother in the small garden courtyard wrapped in blankets and watching the winter birds at the feeder. "There's my girl," her mother said, with a smile that still held echoes of the vibrant woman she had been before the cancer. "You look different. Something's happened." Margaret Grant had always been perceptive, able to read her daughter's moods and emotions with uncanny accuracy. Even now, weakened by months of treatment, she retained that maternal intuition that seemed to see straight through any pretense. "I met someone," Amelia said, settling into the chair beside her mother. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was the part that felt most important to share. "Someone special?" Her mother asked, her eyes bright with interest. "Very special, but it's complicated." "The best ones usually are," Margaret said with a knowing smile. "Tell me about him." So Amelia did. She told her mother about the storm, about finding Daniel and Clara shivering under the cafe awning, about the 3 magical days they had spent together. She told her about Clara's bracelet and artwork, about Daniel's quiet strength and obvious love for his daughter, about the feeling of being part of something larger than herself. "And now?" her mother asked when Amelia had finished. "Now they're gone," Amelia said quietly. "Back to their real life. And I'm trying to figure out what mine looks like without them." Margaret was quiet for a long moment, studying her daughter's face with the intensity of someone who had learned to treasure every moment of clarity. "You know, when your father left, I thought my world had ended," she said finally. "I couldn't imagine how I was going to raise you alone, how I was going to be enough by myself. But you know what I learned?" "What?" "Sometimes the most beautiful chapters of our lives begin when we think the story is over. Your father leaving forced me to become the woman I was meant to be, stronger, more independent, more connected to what really mattered. If he had stayed, I might never have discovered that version of myself." Amelia felt tears starting to form in her eyes. "Are you saying I should be grateful they're gone?" "I'm saying you should be grateful they came," her mother replied gently. "Some people enter our lives to stay, and some come to teach us something we need to learn. It sounds like this man and his daughter reminded you of who you are at your core, someone who sees people who need help and offers it without question. That's not a small gift, sweetheart." "But I miss them already," Amelia whispered. "I miss them so much it actually hurts." "Of course you do," Margaret said, reaching over to take her daughter's hand. "That's how you know it mattered. That's how you know they changed you in ways that will last long after the pain fades." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the birds and sharing the kind of peaceful moment that Amelia had learned to treasure since her mother's diagnosis. Finally, Margaret spoke again. This job offer, you're going to take it, aren't you? Amelia looked at her mother in surprise. How did you get that look when you're trying to talk yourself out of something you know you should do? Margaret said with a smile. The same look you had when you were 7 and didn't want to go to Sarah Peterson's birthday party because you were shy even though you really wanted to go. It would mean seeing him sometimes, Amelia said. Working in the same building, possibly the same meetings. I'm not sure I can handle that. Or it could mean staying connected to something that brought you joy, her mother suggested. It could mean being in a position to do the kind of work that matters to you, helping people the way you helped this man and his daughter. Amelia considered this, thinking about Jennifer Walsh's description of the comprehensive review Daniel had ordered. Maybe her mother was right. Maybe this job opportunity was a chance to channel the same instincts that had led her to offer shelter to strangers, but on a larger scale. What if I run into him and make a fool of myself? She asked. What if you run into him and realize that what you shared was the beginning of something, not the end? Her mother countered. Sweetheart, you've spent the last 2 years putting your life on hold to take care of me. I've watched you sacrifice your own happiness, your own dreams, your own chances at love because you thought it was your responsibility to carry my burden alone. Mom, let me finish, Margaret said firmly. You are the best daughter a woman could ask for, but I will not let my illness cost you the chance at the kind of happiness you deserve. If this job puts you in the same orbit as this man who clearly means something to you, then maybe that's exactly where you're supposed to be. As Amelia rode the bus back to her apartment that evening, her mother's words echoed in her mind. Perhaps she had been looking at the situation all wrong. Perhaps the job offer wasn't a complication to be avoided, but an opportunity to remain connected to something that had brought light into her life. The apartment felt less empty when she returned, though she couldn't say exactly why. Clara's clay horse still sat on her nightstand, and the green ribbon bracelet was still wrapped around her wrist. But somehow the space felt less like a museum of memories and more like a place where new chapters might begin. That night, she called Jennifer Walsh and accepted the position. 3 days later, Amelia walked back into Morrison & Associates for the first time since her termination. The building looked the same, but she felt completely different as she made her way to what would be her new office, larger than her previous cubicle, with a window that overlooked the city and a door she could close for private conversations. Welcome back, Jennifer said, appearing in her doorway with a stack of files and a genuine smile. Ready to jump back in? More than ready, Amelia replied, and realized she meant it. Her first week back was a whirlwind of meetings, project reviews, and getting reacquainted with colleagues who seemed genuinely pleased to have her return. She threw herself into the work with an energy and focus that surprised her, finding purpose in the employee advocacy initiatives she was asked to develop. It was during her second week that she first saw him. She was leaving a late meeting on the 15th floor when the elevator doors opened and Daniel stepped out. His attention focused on the phone pressed to his ear. He was wearing an impeccably tailored suit that made him look every inch the successful CEO. But for just a moment, Amelia saw past the corporate exterior to the man who had fixed her coffee table and taught his daughter to build snowmen. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second before the elevator doors closed between them, but that brief contact was enough to send her heart racing and confirm what she had suspected. All along, seeing him again would be both easier and harder than she had anticipated. Easier because the professional context provided a safe distance, a clear boundary that made their interaction appropriate and manageable. Harder because the connection she felt was just as strong as it had been in her tiny apartment, if not stronger. Over the following weeks, their paths crossed occasionally in the natural course of business. A brief nod in the hallway, a polite acknowledgement during a company-wide meeting, the kind of professional courtesy that any two employees might share. But Amelia was always aware of his presence in the building, the way she might be aware of a storm moving across the horizon, something powerful and potentially disruptive that demanded attention even from a distance. She heard about him through the office grapevine, the whispered conversations that followed any new CEO. The employees seemed cautiously optimistic about his leadership style, his focus on improving workplace culture, his willingness to listen to concerns that had been ignored by previous management. Several of the initiatives he had implemented seemed designed to address exactly the kinds of problems that had led to her original termination: family leave policies, employee support programs, better communication between management and staff. It was during a presentation about the company's new community outreach program that their professional worlds finally collided in a meaningful way. Amelia had been asked to join the planning committee, and when she walked into the conference room for their first meeting, she found Daniel already seated at the head of the table. "Ms. Grant," he said with perfect professional courtesy, as if they were meeting for the first time. "I'm glad you could join us. I understand you have some innovative ideas about employee engagement." "Thank you, Mr. Morrison," she replied, matching his formal tone despite the way her pulse quickened at the sound of his voice. "I'm excited to contribute to the program." The meeting was productive and professional, with Amelia presenting her ideas for partnerships with local nonprofits and volunteer opportunities that would allow employees to give back to their communities. Daniel listened intently, asking thoughtful questions and building on her suggestions in ways that showed he understood not just the business implications, but the human impact of what they were planning. When the meeting ended and the other participants filed out, Amelia found herself gathering her materials, slowly hyper-aware of Daniel's presence as he did the same. "Ms. Grant," he said quietly when they were alone, "could I have a word?" Amelia's heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her expression neutral. "Of course." Daniel moved to close the conference room door, then turned to face her with an expression that was carefully controlled but somehow vulnerable underneath. "How are you?" he asked, and the simple question carried the weight of everything they had shared and lost. "I'm well, thank you," Amelia replied, though the formal words felt inadequate. "How is Clara?" Daniel's expression softened at the mention of his daughter. "She's doing better. The new school has been good for her, and she's made some friends. She asks about you sometimes." The knowledge that Clara remembered her thought about her sent a warm ache through Amelia's chest. "I'm glad she's settling in well." "She still wears the bracelet you helped her make," Daniel said quietly. "She calls it her friendship bracelet and tells anyone who will listen about the nice lady who let us stay with her." Amelia's throat tightened with emotion she was trying hard to control. "She's a special little girl." "She is," Daniel agreed. "And she was right about you being special, too." The words hung between them, loaded with meaning that transcended their professional setting. For a moment, Amelia felt the careful distance she had maintained beginning to crumble. "Daniel," she started, then caught herself. "Mr. Morrison, I should get back to my office." "Of course," he said, stepping back to give her space to leave. "But Amelia—" The use of her first name stopped her at the door. "I'm glad you're here. The company is better with you in it." She looked back at him standing in the conference room in his expensive suit, and for just a moment she saw not the CEO, but the man who had made her coffee and helped his daughter create art projects, and told her she was extraordinary. "Thank you," she said softly, and left before she could say anything else. That night, Amelia called her mother to tell her about the encounter. "And how did that feel?" Margaret asked, with the gentle persistence of someone who knew her daughter well. Confusing, Amelia admitted. Professional but not professional. Polite but charged with everything we're not saying. Maybe it's time to start saying some of those things, her mother suggested. Mom, we work together now. It would be complicated and inappropriate and possibly wonderful, Margaret interrupted. Sweetheart, life is short and unpredictable and full of missed opportunities. I should know. Don't let fear of complications keep you from something that could be extraordinary. As March arrived and the winter began to loosen its grip on Seattle, Amelia found her rhythm at Morrison & Associates. The community outreach program was gaining momentum with several successful partnerships already established and employee participation exceeding all expectations. She was proud of the work they were doing, the difference they were making, the way the company was becoming the kind of place she had always hoped to work. But it was the moments of unexpected connection with Daniel that made her days feel most alive. A shared smile during a presentation, a brief conversation about program logistics that somehow became deeper than it needed to be, the growing sense that they were building something together, even within the constraints of their professional relationship. It was during a particularly successful volunteer event at a local food bank that things shifted between them once again. Amelia had organized the day coordinating with dozens of employees who had given up their Saturday to help sort donations and serve meals. The turnout had been better than anyone had hoped, and the energy was infectious. She was in the middle of directing volunteers when she looked up to see Daniel arriving with Clara in tow, both of them dressed casually and ready to work. "Daddy said we could help today," Clara announced, running up to Amelia with the kind of joy that made it impossible not to smile. "Of course you can help," Amelia said, kneeling down to Clara's level. "There are lots of jobs that need doing." "I can sort cans," Clara said proudly. "I'm really good at organizing things." "I bet you are," Amelia said, glancing up at Daniel, who was watching their interaction with an expression that was warm and complicated. "I hope you don't mind us crashing your event," he said quietly. "Not at all," Amelia replied, standing to face him. "The more help we have, the better." What followed was one of the most natural, comfortable days Amelia had experienced since their weekend together. Working side by side, directing volunteers, sharing meals with the clients they were serving, it felt like a glimpse of what their partnership could look like if circumstances were different. Clara was in her element, charming everyone she met and throwing herself into every task with enthusiasm. Watching her laugh and play with the other volunteers' children, Amelia was struck once again by the little girl's resilience and capacity for joy. "She's thriving," Amelia observed to Daniel during a quiet moment. "She is," he agreed, watching Clara help an elderly man sort through donated clothing. "I think having a purpose helps her, knowing that she can make a difference in other people's lives. She gets that from you," Amelia said without thinking. Daniel looked at her with surprise. "What do you mean, Ma?" "The way you care about people. The way you see past surfaces to what really matters. She's learning that from watching you." "I'm not sure I deserve that much credit," Daniel said quietly. "You do," Amelia said firmly. "You're a good father, Daniel. A good man. Clara knows that even if you sometimes forget it yourself." The intensity of his gaze made her suddenly aware that they were standing very close together, that the casual atmosphere of the volunteer event had lowered her guard in ways that might be dangerous. "Amelia," he said softly, and she could hear in his voice all the things he wasn't saying. Before either of them could say anything else, Clara came running up with a drawing she had made for one of the clients, an elderly woman who had been delighted by the little girl's attention. "Look what I made for Mrs. Patterson," Clara announced, holding up a picture of flowers and sunshine. She said it was the most beautiful thing anyone had given her in years. "It is beautiful," Amelia said, grateful for the interruption, even as part of her mourned the lost moment. "Mrs. Patterson is very lucky." As the day wound down and volunteers began to clean up, Amelia found herself working alongside Daniel and Clara, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The easy cooperation, the shared purpose, the sense of being part of something meaningful together, it all felt so right that it made her chest ache with longing. "Thank you for letting us be part of this," Daniel said, as they prepared to leave. "Thank you for coming," Amelia replied. "It means a lot to have your support." Clara hugged her goodbye with the same fierce affection she had shown that last morning in the apartment, and Amelia found herself holding on perhaps a moment longer than was strictly appropriate. "Will I see you again soon?" Clara asked as she pulled back. "I'm sure you will," Amelia said, glancing at Daniel. "Your daddy and I work together now, so our paths cross fairly often." Clara nodded as if this made perfect sense to her, but there was something in her expression that suggested she understood more about the adult's complicated feelings than she was letting on. That evening, as Amelia sat in her apartment, reflecting on the day, she realized that her mother had been right about something important. Being around Daniel and Clara didn't make her miss what they had shared more painfully, it made her grateful for it. It reminded her of who she was at her best, of the kind of life she wanted to build, of the connections that made everything else worthwhile. Perhaps it was time to stop protecting herself from complications and start embracing the possibility that some complications were worth the risk. Perhaps it was time to stop protecting herself from complications and start embracing the possibility that some complications were worth the risk. But as spring arrived in Seattle and the company's outreach programs continued to flourish, Amelia found herself caught in a delicate dance of professional collaboration and carefully suppressed longing that was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday in April, during what should have been a routine quarterly review meeting. Amelia was presenting the latest statistics on employee engagement and community impact when she noticed Daniel watching her with an intensity that went far beyond professional interest. When their eyes met across the conference table, something passed between them that made her lose her train of thought mid-sentence. "I'm sorry," she said, looking down at her notes with burning cheeks. "Where was I?" "The literacy program partnerships," Jennifer Walsh prompted gently, though Amelia caught the knowing look she exchanged with another committee member. The meeting concluded without further incident, but as the other participants filed out, Daniel remained seated, his expression thoughtful and determined. "Amelia," he said when they were alone, "we need to talk." "About the program metrics?" she asked, though they both knew that wasn't what he meant. "About us, he said quietly. "About this thing we're both pretending doesn't exist." Amelia's heart hammered against her ribs. "Daniel, we work together. It wouldn't be appropriate." "Appropriate," he repeated, standing and moving around the table toward her. "I've been thinking about that word a lot lately. Is it appropriate that I lie awake at night thinking about the woman who saved my daughter and me? Is it appropriate that every decision I make for this company is influenced by wanting to create the kind of workplace you'd be proud to be part of? Is it appropriate that I brought Clara to that volunteer event, not because she wanted to help, but because I needed an excuse to see you outside these sterile conference rooms?" Amelia stared at him, her carefully constructed professional demeanor crumbling under the weight of his honesty. "Daniel, I know this is complicated," he continued, his voice urgent but gentle. "I know there are power dynamics and company policies and 1,000 reasons why this could go wrong. But I also know that what we had that weekend wasn't just desperation or proximity or some kind of trauma bonding. It was real, Amelia. It was the most real thing I've felt since Sarah died. The mention of his late wife sent a stab of something complex through Amelia's chest. Not jealousy exactly, but a deep awareness of the weight of competing loyalties and the courage it took for him to open his heart again. "It was real for me too," she admitted quietly. "But that doesn't make it simple." "The best things never are," Daniel said, moving closer. "Clara asks about you constantly. She's drawn probably 50 pictures of you, and half of them include you in our family portraits. She's been praying every night that somehow you'll come back into our lives permanently." "Children don't understand. Children understand what adults complicate," Daniel interrupted. "Clara knows that you make both of us happier. She knows that the three of us together feel like something that was meant to be. Why is that not enough?" Before Amelia could answer, her phone buzzed with an incoming call. The display showed the care facility's number, and her heart immediately clenched with fear. "I'm sorry I have to take this," she said, answering quickly. "Hello? Amelia, this is Dr. Reeves. You need to come in right away. Your mother has taken a turn for the worse." The world seemed to tilt around her as the words sank in. "I'm on my way," she managed, ending the call with trembling fingers. "What is it?" Daniel asked, his expression immediately shifting to concern. "My mother," Amelia said, gathering her things with shaking hands. "I have to go, I have to—" "I'll drive you," Daniel said without hesitation. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do," he said firmly, already moving toward the door. "You're in no condition to drive, and you shouldn't be alone right now." The drive to the care facility passed in a blur of silent tears and whispered prayers. Daniel's presence beside her was both comforting and surreal. The man she had been trying to keep at a professional distance was now the one holding her together in her moment of greatest fear. "She's going to be okay," he said quietly as they pulled into the parking lot. "Whatever happens, you're not facing this alone." The care facility was hushed with the particular quietness that comes when serious conversations are taking place behind closed doors. Dr. Reeves met them in the hallway outside her mother's room, his expression grave but not without hope. "The cancer has spread more aggressively than we anticipated," he explained gently. "We're looking at weeks, possibly days. I'm sorry, Amelia. We've done everything we can." The words hit her like physical blows, each one stealing a piece of her breath. She felt Daniel's hand on her back, steadying her, and was grateful for the anchor of his presence. "Can I see her?" she asked. "Of course. She's been asking for you." Margaret Grant looked impossibly small in the hospital bed, her face pale but her eyes still bright with the intelligence and love that had guided Amelia through every important moment of her life. When she saw her daughter enter the room, her face lit up with a smile that was pure joy despite the circumstances. "There's my beautiful girl," she said, her voice weak but warm. "Come here." Amelia moved to her mother's bedside, taking her thin hand in both of her own. "Mom, I'm so sorry I wasn't here when—" "Shush," Margaret said gently. "You're here now. That's what matters." Her eyes moved to Daniel, who had quietly positioned himself near the door. "And you brought your young man with you." "Mom, he's not—" Amelia started, but Margaret waved her protest away. "Don't try to fool a dying woman," she said with a spark of her old humor. "I can see it in both your faces. Come closer, Daniel. I want to talk to you." Daniel approached the bed hesitantly, clearly uncertain about intruding on such an intimate family moment. But Margaret's expression was welcoming, even eager. "Sit down," she instructed, patting the edge of the bed. I want to thank you. Thank me, Daniel asked, settling carefully beside her. For bringing my daughter back to life, Margaret said simply. I've watched her sacrifice everything for me over the past 2 years. Her career, her social life, her chance at happiness. She's been so focused on taking care of me that she forgot how to take care of herself. But since that weekend you spent together, she's been different. Lighter. More like the woman she was meant to be. Amelia felt tears streaming down her face as she listened to her mother speak truths she hadn't been able to voice herself. She's extraordinary, Daniel said quietly. She saved us when we needed saving most. And now you need to save her, Margaret said with the directness that had always been her hallmark. Save her from the fear that keeps her from reaching for what she wants. Save her from the guilt that makes her think she doesn't deserve happiness. Save her from herself if you have to. Mom, Amelia protested weakly. I'm dying, sweetheart, Margaret said matter-of-factly. That gives me the right to speak truths that might otherwise stay hidden. Daniel, do you love my daughter? The question hung in the air between them, stark and unmistakable. Daniel looked at Amelia, then back at Margaret, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. Yes, he said simply. I love her completely. And you, Amelia? Margaret continued, turning to her daughter. Do you love him? Amelia looked at Daniel, at this man who had driven her to the hospital without question, who was sitting beside her dying mother with such gentleness and respect, who had looked her in the eye and declared his love without hesitation. All the professional concerns, all the fears about appropriateness and power dynamics seemed suddenly insignificant in the face of what she felt for him. Yes, she whispered. I love him. Margaret smiled with deep satisfaction. Then my work here is done. Over the next 3 days, as Margaret's condition declined, Daniel proved to be exactly the anchor Amelia needed. He arranged for her to take leave from work, brought her meals when she forgot to eat, and sat with her during the long hours of waiting. He never pushed or pressured, simply offered his steady presence and unwavering support. Clara came to visit on the 2nd day, carrying a drawing she had made for Miss Amelia's mommy. Margaret was delighted by the little girl listening to her chatter about school and friends with the kind of attention that only grandmothers possessed. She's perfect, Margaret whispered to Amelia after Clara had fallen asleep in the chair beside Daniel. They both are. Don't let fear steal this from you. Margaret Grant passed away peacefully on a sunny Sunday morning, with Amelia holding one hand and Daniel holding the other. Her last words were a whispered, "I love you," that seemed to encompass not just her daughter, but the future she was blessing, even as she left it behind. The funeral was small but meaningful, attended by colleagues from Morrison and Associates, neighbors from the care facility, and the handful of friends who had remained constant throughout Margaret's illness. Daniel and Clara stayed close to Amelia throughout the service, offering silent comfort and support. It was Jennifer Walsh who pulled Amelia aside after the service to deliver news that would have seemed impossible just a week earlier. "The board met yesterday," she said quietly. "There's been a policy change regarding relationships between senior management and employees. Disclosure and appropriate oversight, but no longer an automatic prohibition." Amelia stared at her in confusion. "I don't understand." Daniel presented a proposal for updated HR policies that reflect modern workplace realities, Jennifer explained with a knowing smile. Relationships happen even in professional settings. The key is transparency and ensuring that business decisions remain untainted by personal feelings. The board approved the changes unanimously. "He did that?" Amelia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He did that, Jennifer confirmed. I think he was planning to tell you himself, but then your mother's situation took precedence. The policy goes into effect immediately if you're interested in taking advantage of it. That evening, after the last of the funeral guests had left and the casseroles had been stored in her refrigerator, Amelia found herself sitting in her apartment with Daniel and Clara. All three of them emotionally exhausted, but somehow at peace. I should probably get Clara home, Daniel said eventually, though he made no move to gather their things. Do we have to go, Daddy? Clara asked from where she was curled up between them on the couch. Can't we stay with Amelia tonight? I think she needs us. The innocent observation cut straight to the heart of what they all needed, but hadn't quite figured out how to ask for. Amelia looked at Daniel, seeing her own longing reflected in his eyes. You could stay, she said quietly, if you want to. Are you sure? Daniel asked. It's been a difficult day, and you might want some time alone to process. I don't want to be alone, Amelia interrupted. I've been alone for so long and I'm tired of it. I'm tired of being careful and appropriate and protecting myself from complications. My mother was right. Life is too short to waste time being afraid of what might go wrong. Daniel moved closer to her on the couch, taking her hand in his. What are you saying? I'm saying I love you. Amelia said the words, feeling both terrifying and liberating. I'm saying I love Clara. I'm saying I want to try if you'll have me. I want to see if we can build something real together, something that lasts. Even though I'm your boss, Daniel asked with a slight smile. Even though you're my boss, Amelia confirmed. Though I hear there are new policies that might make that less of an issue. Daniel's smile widened. You heard about that, did you? I did. And I have to say, it was either very presumptuous or very romantic. I was hoping for romantic, Daniel said, leaning closer, with maybe just a touch of presumptuous. Before Amelia could respond, Clara sat up between them with a grin that suggested she had been following the adult conversation more closely than they had realized. Does this mean you're going to be my new mommy? She asked, with the directness that never failed to surprise them. Amelia felt her breath catch the weight of that hope and responsibility, both thrilling and terrifying. I'd like to be part of your family, she said carefully, if that's what you want. It's what I've been wishing for, Clara said simply. I told God about it every night. I said, please let Amelia love us, and let Daddy love her back, and let us all be together forever. Out of the mouths of babes, Daniel murmured, his voice thick with emotion. So it's official? Clara asked, looking between them expectantly. Amelia and Daniel looked at each other, and she could see in his eyes the same mixture of love and hope and determination that she felt in her own heart. It's official, Daniel said solemnly. We're a family. Clara threw her arms around both of them, and for a moment they stayed that way, three people who had found each other in the midst of loss and grief and discovered that love could bloom even in the darkest seasons. 6 months later, Amelia stood in front of her bathroom mirror, adjusting the green ribbon bracelet that had become her most treasured piece of jewelry. The bracelet had been joined by an engagement ring, a simple sapphire surrounded by diamonds, that Daniel had chosen because it reminded him of the winter sky the night they met. The proposal had happened during another volunteer event with Clara as an enthusiastic co-conspirator who had somehow managed to keep the secret for an entire week. Daniel had knelt in front of the food bank, where they had worked together in front of all their colleagues and friends, and asked her not just to be his wife but to be Clara's mother in every way that mattered. Today was their wedding day, a small ceremony by the lake where they had taken Clara to feed ducks during that magical weekend. Margaret Grant wasn't there in body, but Amelia felt her mother's presence in every detail, from the flowers she had loved to the laughter that filled the air. Clara was serving as both flower girl and maid of honor, a role she took with utmost seriousness. She had insisted on helping choose Amelia's dress, approving of the simple but elegant design, with the solemnity of someone making a very important decision. "You look beautiful," Clara announced from the doorway, already dressed in her own pale blue dress with flowers in her hair. "Daddy is going to cry when he sees you." "Happy tears?" Amelia asked, kneeling down to adjust Clara's flower crown. "The happiest," Clara confirmed. "He told me yesterday that marrying you is the best decision he's ever made, except for adopting me." The words made Amelia's heart full to overflowing. The adoption papers had been finalized just 2 weeks earlier, making Clara officially her daughter in the eyes of the law, as well as her heart. "Are you ready to walk me down the aisle?" Amelia asked, offering Clara her arm. "I've been ready my whole life," Clara said, with 8-year-old wisdom, then paused. "Well, maybe not my whole life, but definitely since I made you that bracelet." They walked together toward the small gathering by the lake where Daniel waited with their friends and colleagues. Jennifer Walsh was serving as the officiant, having been ordained online specifically for their ceremony. The employees from Morrison and Associates had all come along with the volunteers from their various community programs and the families they had helped along the way. When Daniel saw Amelia approaching, his face lit up with such pure joy that several people in the small crowd audibly sighed. He was wearing a simple dark suit with a boutonniere that Clara had helped him choose, and he looked exactly like what he was, a man who had found his way home. "Dearly beloved," Jennifer began when they had gathered in a circle by the water, "we are here today to witness the union of 3 people who found each other in the most unexpected way and created something beautiful together." The ceremony was brief but meaningful, with vows that spoke of love born from kindness, family created by choice, and the courage to embrace second chances. When Daniel slipped the wedding band onto Amelia's finger right next to the green ribbon bracelet she would never take off, he whispered words that only she could hear. "Thank you for saving us," he said. "Thank you for teaching us what home feels like." "Thank you for staying," she whispered back. "Thank you for believing that we were worth fighting for." When Jennifer pronounced them husband and wife, Clara cheered louder than anyone else, and when Daniel and Amelia kissed, she immediately inserted herself between them for a family hug that made everyone present smile through their tears. The reception was held in the community center, where they had organized so many volunteer events decorated with Clara's artwork and filled with the kind of authentic joy that came from people who truly cared about each other. During the dancing, Clara insisted on a special song just for the 3 of them, a silly pop tune that she loved and that had become their unofficial family anthem. As they swayed together on the makeshift dance floor, Amelia looked around at the faces surrounding them and marveled at how dramatically her life had changed. A year ago, she had been unemployed, alone, and watching her mother slowly slip away. Tonight, she was surrounded by love, purpose, and the kind of community she had always dreamed of being part of. "What are you thinking about?" Daniel asked, following her gaze around the room. "I'm thinking about that night in the storm," Amelia said. "About how scared I was to open my door to strangers. About how close I came to just walking past you both and pretending I hadn't seen you." "But you didn't," Clara said, having overheard their conversation with the uncanny ability children possessed for being part of every interesting adult discussion. "You saw us, and you helped us, and you saved us." "I think we all saved each other," Amelia said, looking at her husband and daughter with such overwhelming love that it almost took her breath away. "That's what families do," Clara said matter-of-factly. "They save each other." As the evening wound down and their guests began to leave, offering hugs and congratulations, and promises to stay in touch. Amelia found herself thinking about her mother's words in those final days. Margaret had been right about so many things, about the importance of taking risks, about the danger of letting fear dictate life choices, about the way love could transform even the most impossible circumstances into something beautiful. The honeymoon was a week in a cabin by a mountain lake, just the three of them, with no schedules or obligations beyond enjoying each other's company. Clara had lobbied hard to be included in their honeymoon plans, arguing that since they were becoming a family, they should start their married life as a family unit. It was the perfect choice. They spent their days hiking gentle trails, teaching Clara to fish, and building elaborate sandcastles on the lakeshore. In the evenings, they played board games and read stories and talked about their dreams for the future. "I want us to have more kids," Clara announced one night as they were roasting marshmallows over the campfire. "Maybe a little brother who I can teach things to." Amelia and Daniel exchanged a look over her head, both of them smiling at her characteristic directness. "That's something we'll definitely talk about," Daniel said diplomatically. "When?" Clara pressed. "Because I'm not getting any younger, and I want to be old enough to help with diapers and bottles and stuff." "Soon," Amelia promised and meant it. The thought of expanding their family, of giving Clara siblings, and continuing to build the life they had started filled her with excitement rather than fear. When they returned to Seattle, it was to a life that felt both familiar and completely transformed. They had decided to keep Amelia's apartment as an office space while living in Daniel's house, which Clara had already redecorated with artwork and photos that celebrated their new family configuration. Morrison and Associates continued to thrive under Daniel's leadership, with the community outreach programs becoming a model for other companies in the region. Amelia had been promoted to Director of Community Relations, a role that allowed her to combine her passion for helping people with her professional skills in ways that felt meaningful and sustainable. The best part, though, was the daily routine they had established. Mornings that began with family breakfast and ended with bedtime stories, weekends spent on volunteer projects or simple family adventures, evenings that felt like a constant celebration of having found each other. 1 year after their wedding, as they were decorating their Christmas tree with ornaments that included several clay creations from Clara's growing portfolio, Amelia found herself thinking about the green ribbon bracelet that still adorned her wrist every single day. Clara had made it as a thank you gift, a token to help Amelia remember them when they were gone. But it had become something else entirely, a reminder that the smallest acts of kindness could change everything, that opening your heart to someone in need might mean opening it to the greatest love of your life. "What are you smiling about?" Daniel asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind as she hung Clara's latest artistic creation on a prominent branch. "I'm smiling about wishes coming true," Amelia said, leaning back against his chest. "About how sometimes the most beautiful stories start with the scariest decisions." "No regrets?" he asked, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Only one?" Amelia said, turning in his arms to face him. "What's that?" "I regret that it took us so long to stop being afraid and start trusting what we felt." "We found our way," Daniel said softly. "That's what matters." From across the room, Clara looked up from where she was arranging nativity figures under the tree. "Are you guys being mushy again?" she asked, with the long-suffering tone of a 9-year-old who had grown accustomed to her parents' frequent displays of affection. "Always," Amelia said, not moving away from Daniel's embrace. "Get used to it." "I am used to it," Clara said with a grin. "I like it. It means we're happy." "The happiest," Daniel confirmed. That night, after Clara had been tucked into bed with promises that they would start baking Christmas cookies the next day, Amelia and Daniel sat by their fireplace with cups of hot chocolate, watching the snow fall outside their window. "Do you ever think about that night?" Amelia asked. "About what would have happened if I hadn't seen you under that awning?" "All the time," Daniel admitted. "I think about how close we came to missing each other completely. How different our lives would be if you had just kept walking." "But I didn't keep walking," Amelia said. "And you didn't disappear into the night. We found each other exactly when we needed to." "And Clara found the family she was praying for," Daniel added. "We all found the family we were praying for," Amelia corrected. "Even when we didn't know we were praying for it." As they sat together in comfortable silence, watching the snow transform their neighborhood into a winter wonderland, Amelia thought about all the storms that had brought them to this moment. The literal storm that had driven them together, the emotional storms they had weathered separately and together, the unexpected storms that had tested their resolve and ultimately made them stronger. She thought about her mother, who would have loved seeing them together like this, who would have delighted in spoiling Clara and offering unsolicited advice about everything from child-rearing to career management. Margaret's presence was woven into the fabric of their family in ways both subtle and profound, a reminder that love transcended physical presence and that the best gifts parents could give their children were the tools to recognize and embrace happiness when it appeared. "I love you," she said to Daniel, words that had become as natural as breathing, but that still carried the power to make his eyes light up every time she said them. "I love you too," he replied. "Both of you. More than I ever thought it was possible to love anyone." "Even when Clara decides she wants to redecorate the living room again?" Amelia asked with a laugh. "Even then," Daniel said solemnly, "though I draw the line at purple walls." "I heard that." Clara's voice drifted down from upstairs, followed by a giggle that suggested she was supposed to be asleep, but was listening to their conversation instead. "Go to sleep, sweetheart," Amelia called back. "Santa's watching." "I'm sleeping," Clara called back, her voice muffled but clearly amused. "I'm just sleeping with my ears open." Daniel and Amelia looked at each other and burst into laughter, the kind of deep, joyful laughter that came from being surrounded by love and knowing that this imperfect, chaotic, beautiful life they had built together was exactly what happiness looked like. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the city in the same kind of gentle quiet that had surrounded them that first night. But now, instead of strangers seeking shelter from the storm, they were a family safe and warm and whole, ready to weather whatever storms might come, knowing that they would face them together. The green ribbon bracelet caught the firelight as Amelia reached for Daniel's hand, its uneven knots and mismatched buttons as beautiful as the day Clara had made it. It had started as a gift from a child to mark a moment of kindness, but it had become something much more, a symbol of the way love could grow from the smallest seeds, the way families could be built from courage and compassion, the way the most extraordinary stories often began with the simplest decision to care about someone else. And as they sat together by the fire, planning Christmas morning and dreaming about the years ahead, Amelia knew with absolute certainty that she would wear that bracelet for the rest of her life. A daily reminder that sometimes when you open your door to help someone else, you discover that you're actually opening it to everything you never knew you wanted but always needed. The storm that had brought them together was long over, but the love it had created would last forever.